The sky above the dying world was a roiling sea of smoke and ash. It stretched endlessly, blotting out even the faintest glimmers of distant stars. The wind carried the scent of charred metal and scorched earth, a stench that clung to the skin and burned the lungs with every inhalation. Somewhere in the distance, the remains of a hive city stood, fractured towers and collapsed spires silhouetted against a sky that had long forgotten the light of day. The ground trembled with a low, constant hum, a vibration that seemed to echo deep inside the bones, stirring dread that had no name. Brother, Captain Kale had seen countless battlefields in his long service to the Emperor, but nothing in all of his campaigns had prepared him for the sight before him. The ruins were not merely dead, they were alive with a hunger, a malignant energy that seemed to feed on the fear of those who dared to approach. Every step he took on the cracked, blackened stone sent up sparks of energy, as if the world itself recognized his presence and resented it. Shadows clung to the edges of his vision, flickering and writhing, forming shapes that were almost, but never quite, human. Whispers rose from nowhere and everywhere at once, voices half-formed and indistinguishable, calling his name, mocking him, promising both salvation and annihilation. Kyle's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of his chainsword, the familiar weight of the weapon anchoring him to reality. His ceramite armor, scorched and pitted from countless battles, offered little comfort. Each dent and scratch was a testament to survival, but survival here seemed irrelevant. Here, the rules of the material universe no longer applied. The air itself felt wrong, thick and viscous, pressing against him with an invisible force. As he moved forward, he could see a structure in the distance, a massive archway of blackened stone, etched with runes that burned faintly with a sickly green light. It pulsed, rhythmically, like a beating heart, calling to him. This, Kale knew instinctively, was the gate, the threshold to a realm beyond comprehension. A place that even the bravest of space marines feared to speak of. A place that mortals whispered about only in hushed tones, calling it hell. Each step toward the gate was agony. The ground seemed to shift beneath him, rising and falling in impossible ways, creating gullies that opened suddenly to swallow his feet. Smoke and ash coiled around his legs, and the air vibrated with a low, keening moan, the sound of something vast and patient stirring beneath the surface. Kyle felt his mind strain against the unease, reminding himself that fear was a weapon in this place, and he could not allow it to control him. The closer he drew to the gate, the more the world around him contorted. The ruins of the hive city twisted into grotesque shapes, towers bent at impossible angles, their tops splintered into jagged shards that reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. Walls pulsed as if breathing, and faces appeared in the stone, screaming silently before crumbling back into dust. The ground was littered with corpses, not merely dead, but frozen in expressions of terror and ecstasy at once. Their eyes, glassy and unseeing, seemed to follow him, and he could hear their whispers mingling with the wind. When he stumbled over a broken street, the voice of a child called out, "Kale, come play," it said, soft and sweet. The sound made his armor plates vibrate, and his stomach knotted. He knew, without doubt, that the voice belonged to no child. Kyle forced himself to continue, gritting his teeth against the rising panic. The gate loomed closer, an impossibly tall arch crowned with jagged spires that disappeared into the murky clouds above. Symbols burned along its surface, and though he could not read them, he felt their meaning as a clawing weight in his mind. They promised nothing. They demanded everything. A wind rose suddenly, howling with a voice of many tones, shrill and thunderous. It carried with it visions, flashing like lightning behind Kale's eyes. He saw planets reduced to cinders, starships torn apart by unseen hands, and millions of souls writhing in torment. Each vision passed faster than he could comprehend, yet each left a scar upon his consciousness. He stumbled forward, nearly falling, but caught himself against the jagged stone of the arch. The gate was closer now than ever, and he could see the abyss beyond. At first, it seemed merely dark, a void stretching infinitely. But then shapes began to emerge, silhouettes that defied logic. Massive, clawed forms moved in impossible angles, their motions fluid and unnatural. The ground beneath them shimmered like liquid fire, rivers of molten rock crawling like living things, and the air above was filled with sparks that burned without heat. Cal could hear a sound that had no name. It was the collective scream of countless souls, trapped and twisted, some crying in terror, others in ecstasy. Every vibration of the gate seemed to pulse with that scream, and he felt it echo in his chest. His gauntlet brushed against the surface of the arch, and for a moment he felt something recoil, a push against his very soul. Then the ground gave way beneath him, collapsing like sand under his boots. Kale fell into a void, screaming as the world dissolved around him. There was no bottom, only the endless echo of his own fear. The air burned against his lungs, yet he could breathe, or think he could. Colors not found in the natural universe flashed before his eyes, impossible and screaming, shifting constantly, reflecting his own memories back at him in distorted forms. Faces of comrades, friends long dead, appeared briefly, their expressions twisted into grins of betrayal. His own voice cried out, but it sounded alien, as if spoken by someone else entirely. And then he landed. The ground beneath him was soft, yet unyielding, like flesh and stone fused. The air shimmered with heat, yet carried the scent of decay and ozone. All around him, the landscape stretched impossibly far, towers of black stone dripping like molten wax, rivers of fire moving as if alive, and shadows that bent against the light. The gate had claimed him, and there was no turning back. From the distance he heard it, a whisper, almost gentle, almost familiar. "Kale," it said, "you belong here." He tightened his grip on his chainsword, letting the familiar weight remind him of the Emperor and the duty that still lingered in his soul. The whispers continued, teasing him, but he took a single step forward, and then another. Each step was a battle, not against any creature, but against the world itself. The earth rose to trip him, the rivers of molten rock surged toward him, and the shadows reached for his mind. He moved anyway, forcing one foot before the other, his armor battered by the elements of a world that existed to destroy hope. Kale began to notice patterns in the chaos. The landscape seemed almost purposeful, designed to break those who entered. The towers that appeared random were arranged to mislead, the rivers of fire shifted to corral him toward unknown dangers, and the faces in the stone seemed to study him, waiting for him to falter. And there, rising above all else, in the center of this infernal expanse, he saw it, a figure, tall and impossibly broad, wreathed in shadows that seemed alive. Its eyes burned with a light that made him feel naked, as if it could see not just his body, but every memory, every thought, every sin. It did not move, yet the world trembled at its presence. Kyle knew, without thinking, that this was no mere daemon. It was a herald of the horrors to come, a sentinel guarding the deeper realms of the gate, the first of countless trials. A low growl emanated from its throat, not a sound but a vibration that shook the very air. Kyle's chainsword hummed to life in response, the sound feeble compared to the growl, yet a comfort nonetheless. He raised it, steeling himself. There was no retreat. There could be no retreat. His mind raced, attempting to catalogue the threats around him. Every shadow could hide a dozen claws. Every flicker of molten river could hide a maw ready to devour him. The faces in the towers watched, some screaming, some laughing, some crying silently, but all waiting. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices both sweet and horrific. "Kale, join us, you cannot resist, there is no escape." But Kale forced himself to breathe, to step forward. With each motion, the gate seemed to pulse in response, as if acknowledging his defiance. He could feel a pressure building, a force pushing against him, testing his will. And then he realized the gate was alive, aware, and curious. It was studying him, learning how he would react. The first of many lessons had begun. The air changed before Kyle ever realized he had crossed into another domain. The heat did not fade, but it softened, becoming something intimate and cloying, like warm breath against exposed skin. The sky above shifted from burning black to deep violet, streaked with slow, moving waves of color that pulsed like veins beneath translucent flesh. The ground beneath his boots was no longer rough stone or living rock. It was smooth, almost polished, warm to the touch, and faintly elastic, as though the world itself were made of muscle and nerve rather than earth. With every step Kale took, the land responded. Subtle vibrations ran outward from his feet, rippling through the surface in slow, lazy waves. He stopped moving at once, heart hammering. The ripples continued even after he froze, spreading farther and farther, as if the world were listening, waiting for him to do something more. Then came the sound. At first, it was barely audible, a distant melody, soft and beautiful, drifting through the heavy air. It reminded him of choirs heard through cathedral walls, voices layered upon voices in perfect harmony. The sound wrapped around his thoughts, gentle and soothing. easing the tension in his muscles before he could stop himself. For the first time since entering the gate, Kyle felt something close to comfort. That frightened him more than anything else so far. He tightened his grip on his chainsword and whispered a prayer to the Emperor, forcing the words through clenched teeth. The melody did not fade. Instead, it grew clearer, richer, threaded with laughter and sighs and something dangerously close to pleasure. Each note seemed designed to touch a specific memory, a specific weakness buried deep within his mind. The landscape ahead opened into a vast plain, illuminated by an unnatural glow. Towers rose from the ground like sculpted works of art, elegant and curved, their surfaces reflecting the shifting colors of the sky. Draped fabrics fluttered from balconies and arches, though there was no wind Kale could feel. The structures were beautiful in a way that made his chest achy, perfect and wrong at the same time. Figures moved between the towers. At first glance they looked human. Tall, graceful silhouettes gliding across the surface of the plain, their movements fluid and deliberate. As Kyle focused, details emerged that made his stomach twist. Limbs bent at slightly incorrect angles. Skin shimmered with unnatural hues. Faces were flawless yet unsettling, eyes too large, smiles too wide, expressions frozen between bliss and agony. One of them noticed him. It turned its head slowly, eyes locking onto Kyle with predatory interest. Its smile widened, and it raised a hand in greeting. The gesture was almost polite. "Welcome," it said, its voice layered, as if several voices spoke at once. "You have walked so far. You must be tired." Kyle said nothing. He raised his weapon slightly, keeping the figure in his sights. The chainsword's growl felt weak here, swallowed by the constant hum of sensation that filled the air. More figures gathered, drifting closer, their curiosity obvious. Some touched each other as they moved, fingers trailing along skin in ways that made Kale instinctively look away. Others laughed softly, the sound sharp and musical, cutting through the air like glass. "This place is not meant for suffering," another voice purred, this one closer, almost behind him. Kal spun, but there was nothing there. The voice continued anyway, whispering directly into his thoughts. "Pain is crude. Fear is dull. Here, we offer something better." Images flooded his mind without warning. He saw himself unarmored, unburdened, standing beneath a clean sky. He felt warmth without heat, touch without threat. He felt pride, not the hard discipline of duty, but a deep, satisfying sense of being admired, desired, valued. Applause echoed in his ears. He saw crowds chanting his name, not as a soldier, but as something greater. Kale staggered, one knee dipping toward the ground, before he forced himself upright. He bit down hard, drawing blood, the sharp pain snapping him back to himself. "These are lies." He growled aloud, his voice sounding small in the vast, sensuous space. "You have no power over me." Laughter answered him, warm, amused laughter that wrapped around his words and dissolved them. A figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was taller than the others, its form both masculine and feminine at once, armor fused to flesh in elegant curves. Its eyes burned with a soft inner light, and its smile carried a promise that made Kale's pulse quicken despite himself. "We already do," it said gently. "You just don't know it yet." The ground beneath Kyle's feet shifted. The smooth surface softened further, sinking slightly with his weight, like skin pressed by a hand. Sensations crept up through his boots, subtle vibrations that resonated with his nerves. His breath caught despite his efforts to control it. He forced himself to move. Each step forward became a struggle, not because the ground resisted him, but because it welcomed him. The surface molded around his boots, gripping them gently, urging him to stay. The air thickened with scent, sweet, intoxicating, overwhelming. His armor's internal filters struggled to compensate. Warning runes flickering as unfamiliar compounds flooded the system. The figures followed at a distance, never rushing, never threatening. They didn't need to. The realm itself did their work for them. As Kale advanced, the landscape changed again. The towers faded into mist, replaced by wide halls carved from polished stone and living crystal. Walls reflected distorted images of Kyle as he passed, some heroic, some monstrous, some broken and begging. In one reflection, he saw himself remove his helmet, smiling as hands reached for him from all sides. He shattered the image with a strike from his chainsword. The reflection screamed as it broke, shards dissolving into glittering dust that rained down around him like mockery. The whispers intensified. They spoke of victories he had earned, sacrifices he had made, moments of doubt he had never shared with anyone. They praised his strength, his endurance, his ability to endure horrors that would shatter lesser beings. And then, slowly, they began to ask questions. Was it fair? Was it right? How much had he given, and how little had he taken in return? The questions wormed into his thoughts, gnawing at the edges of his certainty. Cale felt his pace slow despite his efforts. His limbs felt heavy, not with exhaustion but with temptation. The desire to stop, to listen, to accept, grew stronger with every step. Ahead, the hall opened into a vast chamber bathed in shifting light. At its center stood a throne, formed of living flesh and polished bone, its surface adorned with writhing shapes that might once have been human. Upon it sat a being of impossible beauty and horror, its form constantly shifting, reshaping itself to mirror the desires of those who looked upon it. Cale knew its name without being told. This was no mere daemon. This was a voice of Slaanesh. The being leaned forward, resting its chin on one elegant hand. Its eyes met Kyle's, and in that moment he felt stripped bare. Every thought, every fear, every longing laid open and examined. "You endure so much," it said softly. "Why?" Kyle struggled to speak. His throat felt tight, his tongue heavy. "Because it is my duty." The being smiled, and the chamber pulsed in response. Duty, it echoed. Such a small word for such suffering. It rose from the throne, descending the steps with slow, deliberate grace. With each step, the air vibrated, sending waves of sensation through Kyle's body. Pain and pleasure blurred together, becoming indistinguishable. "You could rest," the being whispered as it approached. "You could feel. You could be more than a weapon." Kyle screamed, forcing himself to remember the faces of his brothers, the sound of bolter fire, the cold certainty of faith. He activated his chainsword fully, the roar loud and defiant. "I am the Emperor's," he roared. "You have no claim on me!" The being laughed, not mockingly, but fondly. "We shall see." The chamber began to close in, walls bending inward, reflections multiplying. Hands reached from the surfaces, touching, grasping, exploring. Cale fought forward, hacking at limbs that dissolved into light and laughter when struck. The music rose to a deafening crescendo, each note vibrating through his bones. As he burst through the far side of the chamber, the world shattered behind him, collapsing into a storm of color and sound. And the laughter followed. Kyle ran. The ground no longer felt solid beneath him. With every stride it shifted and flowed, rising in soft waves that slowed him without ever stopping him completely. The sensation was maddening, like trying to flee across a living body that wanted him to stay. The laughter echoed behind him, not loud, not urgent, but patient. It did not need to chase. It knew the realm itself would do the work. The light around him fractured into shards of color, bending and folding in ways that hurt to look at. The sky above twisted downward, closing in like a vast dome of stained glass, each pane showing a different scene. Kyle saw battlefields he had fought upon, but altered. Blood shone brighter, screams lingered longer, and moments of pain stretched into eternity. He saw himself standing over fallen enemies, not grim and resolute, but smiling, enjoying it. "No," he whispered, forcing his legs to keep moving. The whispers returned, closer now, brushing against his thoughts with intimate familiarity. They no longer tempted him with grand promises. Instead, they focused on small things: relief, silence, rest. He felt exhaustion hit him all at once, crushing and overwhelming. His muscles burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, and the weight of his armor felt unbearable. His armor's systems flickered, warnings flashing and vanishing as the warp interfered with their function. Time felt wrong here. He could not tell how long he had been running. It could have been moments or centuries. The path ahead narrowed into a corridor formed of translucent flesh-like walls, pulsing gently with each distant beat of unseen drums. Shapes moved within them, silhouettes pressing outward as Kyle passed, their outlines stretching and distorting as if trying to reach him. Faces emerged briefly, eyes closed in bliss, mouths open in silent screams, before melting back into the walls. A hand brushed his pauldron. Kyle spun, chainsword roaring, but struck only empty air. The sensation lingered anyway, a ghost of touch that crawled along his nerves. He shuddered, nearly losing his footing as the ground buckled beneath him. "You feel it," a voice murmured, no longer hiding its pleasure. "Even now. Even while you resist." The corridor opened suddenly, spilling Cale into a vast amphitheater carved from living crystal and bone. Rows upon rows of figures filled the tiers, all watching him. Thousands, perhaps millions. Their faces were rapt, eyes shining with hunger and delight. Some applauded softly, others wept openly. All of them were focused on him alone, At the center of the arena stood a raised platform. Upon it lay a single object, his helmet. Cal froze. It was unmistakable. The same scratches. The same sigils carved into the surface by his own hand after his first campaign. It rested there as if placed with reverence, illuminated by a soft, welcoming glow. The crowd leaned forward as one. A voice rolled across the amphitheater, rich and resonant, vibrating through Cal's chest. "Take it off." His hands trembled despite his will. The thought slithered into his mind uninvited, seductive and reasonable. Just for a moment. Just to breathe freely. Just to feel something real. He took a step forward before he realized it. The crowd erupted in approval, a wave of sound that washed over him like warm water. Pleasure spiked through his nerves, sharp and sudden, followed immediately by shame. Cal stumbled back, shaking his head violently. "I will not," he snarled. The approval turned to anticipation. The figures began to change. Their beautiful forms stretched and warped, bones shifting beneath skin, mouths splitting wider, eyes multiplying. What had once been elegance twisted into excess, beauty into grotesque exaggeration. The applause continued, louder now, frantic, desperate. "Then we will help you understand," the voice said calmly. The arena floor split open. Cal barely had time to brace himself before he was dragged downward, pulled by unseen forces into darkness streaked with color. He fell through layers of sensation, each one more intense than the last. Pleasure that burned, pain that thrilled, emotions amplified until they drowned thought itself. He struck the ground hard, armor cracking as he landed on a surface that felt like silk stretched over stone. He was no longer alone. Creatures circled him, low to the ground, their bodies a blur of limbs and curves and blades. Their movements were hypnotic, fluid and precise. They did not attack immediately. They waited, savoring the moment. Cal rose slowly, every nerve screaming. His chainsword felt heavy, his arms sluggish. The creatures closed in, brushing against him, whispering into his ears with voices that slid directly into his mind. "You fight so hard," one crooned. "You deny yourself so much," hissed another. "Let go." They whispered together. The first strike came without warning. A blade of living bone sliced across Cal's armor, sending sparks and sensation flaring through his body. He roared and retaliated, chainsword tearing through one creature in a spray of iridescent light. It screamed, not in pain but in ecstasy as it dissolved. The others attacked at once. They moved too fast, striking from impossible angles, each blow calculated not to kill, but to overwhelm. Every wound carried a surge of sensation that made Kyle's vision blur. His mind reeled as pain and pleasure tangled together, threatening to drown his thoughts. He fought on instinct, muscle memory guiding his strikes when reason faltered. He prayed aloud, shouting fragments of litanies between gasps, clinging to the rhythm of the words like a lifeline. Slowly, painfully, the creatures fell back, not defeated. Satisfied, the ground beneath Cal gave way again, lowering him gently into a vast chamber, bathed in soft, shifting light. The walls were mirrors once more, but now they showed only one image, Kyle. Different versions of him stood reflected on every surface. One wore his armor proudly, eyes hard and resolute. Another stood unarmored, smiling softly, arms open. Another knelt, broken and weeping. Another laughed as blood dripped from his hands. The reflections spoke in unison. Which one is real? Cal sank to one knee, breath ragged, his mind screaming for silence. The weight of the realm pressed down on him, heavy and intimate. He felt himself slipping, his faith stretched thin, his will fraying. Then, faintly, impossibly, he heard something else. A memory. The steady cadence of marching boots, the echo of a cathedral's bells, the voice of a chaplain reciting vows beneath a cold, unyielding sky. He forced himself to stand. "I am all of them," he said hoarsely. "Add none of you." The mirrors began to crack. Light flared, harsh and blinding, cutting through the soft glow of the realm. The laughter faltered, turning sharp and angry. The ground shook violently, and the chamber began to tear itself apart. Kyle ran again, this time toward the growing in reality ahead. The realm screamed around him, pleasure twisting into fury as it realized he was slipping beyond its grasp. As he crossed the threshold, a final whisper brushed his mind, no longer amused. "You will remember us." The world shattered into darkness, and Cal fell once more deeper into the warp, carrying the scars of excess etched into his soul as the next nightmare awaited. Cal did not land this time. He drifted. There was no sense of falling or rising, no clear direction at all. The darkness around him was thick and heavy, like deep water pressing in from every side. His armor felt heavier than it ever had, as though the weight of entire worlds rested on his shoulders. Each breath came slow and wet, filtered air bubbling through systems that no longer sounded clean. Then came the smell. It seeped through the seals of his armor as if they did not exist. Rot. Sweet, cloying decay layered over something older and deeper. The smell of soil left too long in the rain, of meat forgotten in the sun, of wounds that never healed. Kale gagged, his body reacting before his mind could prepare. The darkness thinned, revealing a sky the color of bruised flesh, swollen and sagging low overhead. Massive shapes floated within it, bloated clouds that pulsed and oozed, occasionally bursting to rain thick droplets onto the land below. Each drop struck the ground with a wet sound, splashing into pools of viscous filth that hissed and steamed. Kyle's boots touched solid ground at last. The surface beneath him was soft and uneven, sinking slightly with his weight. It felt like walking across a field of swollen corpses buried just beneath the surface. Each step released bubbles of foul gas that drifted upward, carrying laughter within their popping echoes. He straightened slowly, every movement stiff and painful. His armor was stained now, coated in layers of grime and corrosion that ate slowly at the ceramite. Warning runes flared briefly, then went dark, as if the systems themselves had grown tired of protesting. The land stretched endlessly in every direction. Rolling hills of decaying matter rose and fell, dotted with enormous growths that resembled tumors the size of buildings. Thick vines pulsed along the ground, their surfaces split with weeping sores that dripped fluids of every color imaginable. Something moved nearby. Kale turned, weapon raised, but what emerged from behind a mound of rot was not attacking. It was walking, slowly, cheerfully. The figure was once human, that much was clear. Its armor hung loosely from its bloated frame, split open by growths that pushed outward from within. Its face was swollen and cracked, one eye missing entirely, the other cloudy and unfocused. Maggots wreathed openly in the exposed flesh of its neck, and it was smiling. New one. It said happily, its voice wet and bubbling. "You're fresh. I can tell." Kyle took an involuntary step back. The creature laughed, a deep, warm sound that echoed across the land. "Don't be shy. We all look like this eventually." More figures appeared. They emerged from the fog, from behind hills, from pools of filth. Men, women, soldiers, civilians, all of them swollen, broken, and decayed in unique ways. Some dragged limbs behind them. Others coughed constantly, expelling clouds of spores that drifted lazily through the air. None of them looked angry. Most looked content. "You're in the garden," one said kindly. Father's garden. Cal felt dread settle deep in his chest. Nurgle. The plague god's realm did not scream like the others. It did not tempt with pleasure or demand blood. It welcomed. It enveloped. It smothered resistance beneath layers of acceptance and false comfort. Kale moved forward cautiously, every instinct screaming at him to keep moving, to never stop. The ground squelched beneath his boots, and with each step, the smell grew stronger. His armor's joints stiffened as corrosion spread, metal flaking away in slow, inevitable decay. A massive structure loomed ahead, grown rather than built. It resembled a cathedral made of swollen bone and rotting wood, its towers sagging under their own weight. Bells hung from its arches, enormous and rusted, tolling softly despite the absence of wind. Each chime made Kyle's head throb. As he approached, the figures parted to let him pass, nodding and smiling, murmuring welcomes and blessings. Some reached out to touch him. Where their fingers brushed his armor, corrosion accelerated. "You don't have to fight it," a voice whispered gently from behind him. "That's what hurts the most." Kyle spun. A towering figure stood there, massive and bloated, its body split open in countless places. From within spilled clouds of flies, buzzing loudly as they swarmed around its head like a living crown. Its face was barely recognizable, features sunken and sagging, yet its eyes were bright with affection. "You're suffering," it said kindly. "We can fix that." Kyle raised his chainsword, though his arms trembled. "Stay back." The figure chuckled, always the same at first. It gestured around them. "Look. No fear here. No pain that matters. No endings." Kale looked. He saw figures collapse to the ground as limbs gave out, only to rise again moments later, laughing as bones pushed back into place in grotesque new shapes. He saw bodies burst open, releasing swarms of insects, only for the wounds to seal moments later, leaving behind thicker, tougher flesh. No one screamed. That was the worst part. "You die here," the figure continued calmly, "but you never leave. And after a while you stop wanting to." Kyle felt something crawl beneath his skin. It began as an itch, a faint irritation along his arms, his chest, his neck. He scratched instinctively, fingers scraping against armor. Warning lights flared briefly, showing internal contamination. He ignored them. The itch became a burn, then a warmth. His breathing slowed. The pain in his muscles dulled. The crushing exhaustion he had carried since entering the warp softened, fading into a heavy, comforting numbness. Kyle stumbled. Hands caught him before he fell. Bloated, gentle hands supported his weight, steadying him. "There we go," someone murmured soothingly. "Just rest." The ground rose beneath him, forming a shallow cradle of soft decay. It would be so easy to lie down, to let the weight slip away, to stop fighting. Images drifted through his mind. A battlefield after the fighting had ended. Silence. No orders, no alarms, no screams, just stillness. The Emperor felt very far away. A wet cough shook Kale's body violently, snapping him back. He spat thick black fluid onto the ground, watching in horror as it wriggled with microscopic life before sinking into the soil. "No," he growled, forcing himself upright. "This is a lie." The massive figure frowned, genuinely puzzled.
"Lee, no."
"It's mercy." Kale staggered forward, pushing past grasping hands. Each step felt heavier than the last. His joints ached, his vision blurred, and the itch beneath his skin grew stronger, spreading across his body. Boils formed beneath his armor. He could feel them pressing outward, stretching skin, threatening to burst. His breaths came with a wet rattle now, each inhalation filled with fluid. The garden responded eagerly. Vines rose to support him, cradling his weight. Flies gathered around his head, buzzing softly like a lullaby. The bells of the cathedral tolled again, slower this time, deeper. "Let go," the voices murmured. "There is no shame in it." Kyle screamed, the sound raw and broken. He forced himself onward, tearing free of the vines, ripping chunks of decayed flesh from the ground as he pushed forward. Each step left trails of corruption behind him, the garden marking him as its own. Ahead he saw a massive silhouette forming in the fog. Something vast, something ancient, something that radiated warmth and affection like a diseased sun, and Kale knew, with sick certainty, that he was walking toward the heart of decay itself. The fog thickened as Kale moved forward, clinging to him like wet cloth. Each breath dragged the stench deeper into his lungs, and now it no longer burned as sharply as before. His body was adapting. That realization filled him with quiet terror. The itch beneath his skin spread, turning into a crawling sensation, as though countless tiny things were burrowing just under the surface. His armor felt tighter, not because it was shrinking, but because his body was swelling inside it. The massive silhouette ahead grew clearer with every step. It was enormous, dwarfing the cathedral structures around it. A mountain of flesh and rot, slumped against the landscape, as if resting. Its surface was layered with folds upon folds of diseased tissue, split open by wounds that never closed. From these wounds poured rivers of filth and living things, worms, flies, beetles the size of fists, spilling endlessly onto the ground below. And yet, the presence radiating from it was not hostile. It was warm, comforting. Kale felt it like a hand on his back, guiding him forward, supporting his weight when his legs threatened to give out. His thoughts slowed, dulled by the oppressive affection of the place. The sharp edge of fear softened into something closer to resignation. Around him, the inhabitants of the garden gathered again, forming a loose procession. They shuffled alongside him, some limping, some crawling, some floating slightly above the ground on clouds of buzzing insects. They hummed softly, a low, droning sound that blended with the tolling bells. "You're almost there," one of them said encouragingly. "Father will be so pleased." Kyle's vision blurred. The world pulsed with each slow beat of something vast and unseen. He could feel his heart struggling, their rhythm faltering. His armor's internal systems finally failed entirely, the last warning rune blinking out like a dying star. Pain returned suddenly, sharp and overwhelming. A boil beneath his chest plate ruptured, flooding his armor with warm fluid. Kyle cried out, staggering, his chainsword slipping from his grip and sinking into the soft ground with a wet thud. He fell to one knee, then both, his gauntlets sinking deep into the diseased earth. Hands closed around him at once. They were gentle, supporting, loving. "Rest," the voices whispered. "You've done enough." Kyle sagged forward, his helmet hanging low. The ground beneath him felt almost soft enough to sleep on. His thoughts wandered, slipping away from discipline and duty towards simple relief. The Emperor's light flickered faintly, like a distant memory rather than a presence. The massive form ahead stirred, A sound rolled across the garden, deep and rumbling like distant thunder muffled by layers of flesh. The ground vibrated in response, sending ripples through the pools of filth. Laughter followed. It was vast, deep, kind. Kyle looked up. The thing before him shifted, turning its bulk slightly. A face emerged from the folds, huge, bloated, and cracked, yet unmistakably expressive. One eye was swollen shut, the other gleamed with sickly affection. Its mouth split wide into a smile that could have swallowed tanks. "Poor child," it said warmly, its voice vibrating through Kyle's bones rather than his ears. Kyle tried to rise. His body refused. "You don't need to fight anymore," the plague god continued gently. "No more pain. No more loss. I will take it all from you." Kyle felt something inside him loosen. The boils stopped hurting. The weight in his chest eased. His breathing slowed, becoming shallow but comfortable. The crawling beneath his skin settled into a warm numbness. For a terrifying moment, he wanted it. Images bloomed in his mind, centuries stretching endlessly ahead, free of urgency. He saw himself walking the garden, swollen and broken but smiling, greeting newcomers with kindness. No fear, no death that mattered. Forever. A fly landed on the lens of his helmet. Kale focused on it. The tiny creature rubbed its legs together, its multifaceted eyes reflecting distorted images of the garden. In one reflection, Kyle saw himself unarmored, bloated, laughing softly as decay consumed him inch by inch. Something snapped. A memory surged through the fog in his mind. A battlefield under a cold, clean sky. Brothers standing shoulder to shoulder. Pain endured not for comfort, but for purpose. The Emperor's name spoken not as a promise of relief, but as a command to endure. Kale screamed. The sound tore from his throat, raw and defiant. He slammed his gauntlet into the ground, ignoring the pain as bone grated against ceramite. He forced his body upright, trembling violently. The hands holding him recoiled in surprise. "No," he rasped. "I will not rot here." The plague god's smile faltered, just slightly. Kyle lunged forward, dragging himself toward his fallen chainsword. Each movement tore open wounds, sending sprays of infected fluid across the ground. The garden responded angrily now. Vines wrapped around his legs, pulling him back. Flies swarmed his visor, blotting out his vision. He grabbed the chainsword and activated it. The roar of its engine cut through the droning hum of the garden like a blade. Kyle swung wildly, carving through vines, spraying filth and writhing flesh. The ground screamed not in pain, but in outrage. "Why struggle?" the plague god asked, its voice no longer entirely gentle. "You cannot escape what you are becoming." Kale charged. He ran directly toward the towering form, every step fueled by sheer will. The garden lashed out, growths erupting from the ground, disease surging through the air, but Kale did not stop. He slammed the chainsword into the plague god's flesh, carving a deep, oozing wound. The wound laughed, thick, foul fluid poured out, splashing over Kyle, soaking into his armor. The plague god chuckled, amused rather than angry. "Good," it said approvingly. "Still spirit in you." The ground beneath Kale suddenly collapsed. He fell backward, dragged down by grasping hands and clinging filth, pulled into a churning pit of decay. Darkness swallowed him as the garden closed overhead, sealing him away from the bloated warmth of its master. As he sank, the last thing he heard was the plague god's voice, echoing softly in his mind. "You'll carry my gifts with you," it said fondly. "No one leaves untouched." The darkness thickened, and Kale fell onward, deeper into the warp, carrying rot in his flesh and fear in his soul, as another realm waited to test what little remained of him. Kale drifted through darkness again, but this time it was different. The warmth was gone. The comfort had been torn away, leaving behind raw, gnawing cold that cut through him more sharply than any blade. His body ached in ways he could not fully feel, as if parts of him were no longer entirely his own. He floated without direction, carried by unseen currents, surrounded by faint echoes of buzzing wings and distant, disappointed laughter. His armor was failing. He could feel it now, truly feel it. The inner seals were breached beyond repair. Filth had seeped into every joint, every lining. Beneath the ceramite, his skin burned and itched, tight and swollen. Each breath rattled in his chest, thick with moisture. He coughed, and something warm and heavy splashed against the inside of his helmet. Kyle forced his eyes open. The darkness thinned into a gray haze. Shapes emerged slowly, like memories struggling to surface. He lay on cracked ground streaked with black veins that pulsed faintly, as if pumping something foul beneath the surface. The air was colder here, sharper, stripped of the garden's suffocating affection. But the rot remained. Cal pushed himself up onto one elbow and froze. His gauntlet was wrong. The metal was pitted and eaten through in places, but beneath the damaged ceramite, his flesh bulged unnaturally. The skin was pale and stretched, veins dark and swollen. Small lesions dotted his forearm, weeping fluid that hissed softly as it touched the ground. He clenched his fist. It responded sluggishly, as if reluctant. No, he whispered, his voice hoarse and wet. The garden had marked him. Cal struggled to his feet, swaying. Every movement sent pain lancing through his body, sharp now where before there had been numbness. The comfort was gone, replaced by cruel clarity. His breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation scraping his throat raw. The landscape around him was barren compared to the garden. Jagged stone rose in twisted spires, their edges sharp and broken. The sky above churned with dark clouds shot through with sickly green lightning that crackled silently. The ground trembled intermittently, as though reality itself was straining to hold together. Carl took a step forward. His leg buckled. He barely caught himself, slamming his shoulder against a rock formation. The impact sent a jolt through his body, and one of the swollen boils along his side ruptured fully. He cried out as foul fluid spilled down his armor, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of decay. The laughter returned. Not close, not loud. Distant, satisfied. "You see," a whisper murmured at the edge of his thoughts. "You survived. That's what matters." Cal pressed his forehead against the cold stone, breathing hard. His vision blurred, not from exhaustion alone, but from the creeping fear that the whisper might be right. He was still alive, still moving, and yet he was changed. He remembered the garden, the warmth, the relief. For a moment, the thought tempted him again. Cal slammed his head back against the rock, the impact ringing through his skull. Pain flared, sharp and grounding. "I endure," he rasped. "That is enough." He pushed himself upright and began to walk. Each step was torture. His joints screamed in protest. His muscles spasmed unpredictably. The rot inside him fought his movement, tugging at his limbs, urging him to slow, to rest, to surrender. He ignored it, focusing on one step at a time. The ground beneath him shifted subtly, becoming less solid, more fluid. Cracks opened and closed like breathing mouths. From within them drifted faint, echoing sounds, distant coughing, wet laughter, the buzzing of flies. Cal realized with growing dread that he was not entirely free of the garden. It followed him, not physically, but spiritually. Every so often, his vision flickered, and he glimpsed the rolling hills of decay overlapping with the jagged terrain before him. For a heartbeat, the air would grow warm again, heavy with rot and affection, before snapping back to cold clarity. The plague god's gift lingered. Kyle stumbled into a narrow ravine where the walls pressed close, streaked with black slime. He leaned heavily against one side, catching his breath. His lungs burned, each inhale producing a wet rattle that he could not suppress. Something moved in the shadows ahead. Kyle raised his chainsword slowly, his arms trembling. The sound of the engine was weaker now, uneven, but it still roared to life. A figure emerged, not bloated, not rotting, thin, gaunt, twisted. Its skin clung tightly to its bones, stretched and cracked, eyes sunken deep into its skull. It stared at Cal with hollow intensity. "You carry it," the figure said softly. "I can smell it on you." Cal said nothing. The figure stepped closer, limping. "You think you escaped? None of us escape. We just changed the shape of our chains." It raised a skeletal hand and pointed at Kyle's chest. "He loves you now." Cal lunged. The chainsword tore through the figure in a spray of dark mist. It collapsed soundlessly, dissolving into ash that scattered across the ravine floor. Cal stood there, shaking, the roar of his weapon echoing off the stone walls before fading into silence. He was alone again. But the silence was not empty. It was waiting. The ravine opened suddenly into a vast chasm. At its center, suspended over a swirling void of raw warp energy, was a narrow bridge of cracked stone and warped metal. It pulsed faintly, unstable, leading toward a distant glow on the far side. Cal knew instinctively that this was his path forward. He stepped onto the bridge. The structure groaned under his weight, fragments flaking away into the void below. Each step sent vibrations through his damaged body, shaking loose pain and corruption alike. He focused on the glow ahead, refusing to look down. Halfway across, the whispers returned with renewed intensity. "You could turn back," they urged. "The garden would welcome you." Kyle staggered, but did not stop. "You will rot anyway." The voices pressed. Why suffer alone? His vision darkened at the edges. His breath came in shallow gasps. He felt the corruption surge inside him, pressing outward, eager, Kale screamed again, louder this time, pouring everything he had left into the sound. He charged forward, running despite the pain, despite the bridge crumbling beneath him. The glow ahead flared brighter. The bridge collapsed behind him. Kyle leapt. For a moment, he was suspended between worlds, between decay and something worse. The rot inside him screamed, the warp howled around him, and then he slammed into solid ground, rolling hard across scorched stone. He lay there, gasping, body racked with pain. Slowly, the whispers faded. The warmth did not return. Only the ache remained. Kyle rolled onto his back, staring up at a sky filled with violent storms and distant, screaming colors. His armor was ruined. His body was scarred. He could feel the rot still there, dormant but alive. A reminder, hell was not just a place, it stayed with you. Kale forced himself to rise once more, dragging his broken body forward into the next nightmare, knowing now that survival did not mean escape, only endurance. And somewhere far behind him, in a garden that never truly faded, something bloated and loving smiled. Kale did not fall this time. He was thrown. The force hurled him forward through screaming color and fractured light, slamming him into solid ground with bone-crushing violence. Pain exploded through his body as armor and flesh struck rock and metal alike. He rolled, skidding across a surface littered with shattered weapons and broken bodies, before finally coming to a stop against something hard and unyielding. Silence did not follow. Sound did, a roar so vast and constant that it became the air itself. Kale groaned, forcing himself onto his hands and knees. His vision swam, blurred by blood and warp residue. When his sight cleared, the world around him snapped into horrifying focus. He stood on a battlefield without end. The ground was a churned sea of mud and gore, soaked so deeply with blood that it glistened like oil under a sky the color of rusted iron. The air was thick with smoke and ash, carrying the sharp tang of iron and the stench of fresh death. Everywhere he looked, there was movement, armies clashing, bodies falling, blades rising and falling in endless, merciless rhythm. There were no walls, no cities, no landmarks, only war. The sky thundered constantly, not with storms, but with distant impacts, as if colossal weapons struck reality itself over and over again. Lightning cracked red across the clouds, illuminating silhouettes of titanic forms locked in eternal combat far above. Kyle's ears rang as the roar resolved into countless overlapping sounds, battle cries, screams, the clash of steel, the bark of bolters, the tearing howl of chain blades biting into flesh. Khorne's realm. Kyle rose slowly, every muscle screaming in protest. The rot from the garden still burned beneath his skin, but here it was drowned out by something louder, heavier, more demanding. Rage pressed against his thoughts like a physical weight. A figure charged him without warning. Kale barely had time to react. He twisted aside as a massive axe crashed down where his head had been moments before, sending chunks of gore spraying into the air. He retaliated on instinct, chainsword roaring as it tore through the attacker's torso. The warrior collapsed in two halves. Before the body even hit the ground, it began to move. Muscle knotted, bone shifted, blood flowed backward. The two halves slammed together and rose again, whole and screaming, eyes burning with fury. Kale staggered back in shock. The warrior charged again. Kale fought. There was no choice, no pause, no time to think. Blades clashed, blood sprayed. Kyle cut the warrior down again and again, each time watching in mounting horror as the body reformed, stronger, faster, angrier. Around them, the battlefield raged on without pause. Warriors of every shape and origin slaughtered one another in endless waves. Human soldiers fought alongside monstrous brutes. Alien forms clashed with daemons, and fallen bodies were trampled into the mud only to rise again moments later, screaming for more blood. There was no retreat here. Only forward. The warrior finally fell for the last time when a massive chanax swung down from nowhere, crushing its skull into pulp. Kyle turned just in time to see its killer, a towering figure clad in brass armor, horns curving from its helm, its weapon dripping with gore. The figure turned its burning gaze toward Kale. Fight. It growled. Then it charged. Kyle met it head-on. The impact nearly tore his arm from its socket. Sparks flew as chainblade met chainaxe, the screech of metal drowning out everything else. The figure was monstrously strong, every blow forcing Kale back step by step. Rage surged through him. Not fear, not discipline. Rage. His thoughts narrowed, sharpened to a single point. The pain in his body became fuel. The exhaustion vanished beneath the surge of adrenaline flooding his system. Kyle roared and struck harder. He drove the chainsword into the figure's chest, carving upward, ripping armor and flesh apart in a fountain of blood. The creature laughed as it died, collapsing into the mud. Kyle stood panting, blood dripping from his armor, his weapon humming eagerly in his hands. The battlefield responded. A cheer rolled across the land, deep and thunderous. Warriors nearby turned toward Kyle, eyes blazing with approval. Some nodded. Others raised weapons in salute before charging back into combat. Kyle's heart pounded violently. He felt powerful. He hated that he liked it. The sky darkened further, clouds spiraling into a vast vortex overhead. From within it came a deafening roar, so immense that it rattled Kyle's bones. The ground shook. Something vast shifted beyond the horizon. The battlefield grew more intense. Enemies came faster now, harder, more relentless. Kyle fought without pause, cutting down foe after foe. His movements became automatic, fluid, brutal. He stopped counting the kills. He stopped noticing the pain. Blood coated him head to toe. At some point, he realized the rot no longer burned. It had been drowned out. Warriors fell around him, rose again, fell again. Kyle himself took blows that should have crippled him. Gashes across his armor, impacts that cracked ceramite, wounds that bled freely. Yet he kept moving, kept killing. Time lost meaning. The battlefield became everything. A massive shape loomed ahead, towering above the fighting masses. A throne of skulls rose from the gore, soaked earth, its steps slick with blood. Upon it sat a colossal figure clad in armor the color of dried gore, its form wreathed in chains and trophies of slaughter. Kyle felt its gaze like a hammer blow. Khorne, the blood god, did not speak. He did not need to. The battlefield surged toward the throne, combat intensifying as warriors fought desperately to prove themselves worthy. Kyle felt the pull instantly, a primal urge dragging him forward through the chaos. Every instinct screamed at him to advance, to fight, to kill. He began to walk. Each step toward the throne filled him with mounting fury. Memories blurred. The Emperor's name faded beneath the roar of blood in his ears. All that mattered was the next enemy, the next strike. Kyle cut down anything that stood in his way, tearing through bodies with savage efficiency. He no longer hesitated. He no longer questioned. He roared challenges at the sky, his voice joining the endless chorus of war. As he neared the throne, the pressure intensified. His vision narrowed, edges darkening. His thoughts fragmented, reduced to instinct and rage. A final challenger stepped into his path. This one was different. It wore armor bearing the same sigils as Kyle's own chapter. Its helm was split open, revealing a familiar face beneath, scarred, furious, accusing. A brother. You abandoned us. The figure snarled, raising its blade. Kyle hesitated, just for a heartbeat, and that hesitation burned. The hesitation cost him dearly. The blade struck Kyle across the chest, biting into ceramite and carving a deep groove that sent sparks and blood spraying into the air. Pain flared, sharp and immediate, slicing through the haze of rage like cold water. The familiar face snarled behind the cracked helm, eyes burning with hatred. You chose this, the figure said. You left us to die. Kyle staggered back, struggling to lift his chainsword. The battlefield seemed to dim around them. The endless roar muffled as if the world itself leaned in to watch. I didn't, Kyle growled, though the words felt weak even to his own ears. The figure laughed, a broken, bitter sound. You did. You stepped away. You survived. We didn't. The brother attacked again, faster this time, blows precise and merciless. Kyle barely blocked in time, each impact rattling his arms to the bone. This was not a mindless berserker. This was skill honed by endless war, fueled by betrayal and rage sharpened into a weapon. Kyle was driven back step by step, boots slipping in the gore, slick mud. With every clash, memories surged unbidden. Faces of brothers lost, orders shouted over bolter fire, retreats that became routes, moments where Kyle had lived while others had not. The battlefield around them reacted, warriors slowed, daemons circled. The clash of distant combat softened, as if Khorne himself waited to see which truth would win. The brother slammed Kyle to the ground, knocking the chainsword from his grip. The weapon skidded away, its engine whining hungrily as it disappeared into the press of bodies. The blade hovered above Kyle's throat. Finish it, the brother hissed. Prove what you are. Kyle stared up at the weapon, at the familiar sigils carved into its length. Rage boiled within him, begging for release, demanding blood. But beneath it, something else stirred, defiance. Kyle surged upward, smashing his helmet into the brother's face. The cracked helm shattered completely, revealing a corpse-like visage beneath, skin pale and stretched tight, eyes hollow and burning. Kyle grabbed the brother's wrist and twisted hard. Bone snapped with a wet crunch. The blade fell. They grappled in the mud, fists slamming into armor, blood splattering with every blow. Kyle felt his strength wane, the rage faltering under the weight of recognition. The brother's grip tightened around his throat. "Say it." The figure snarled. "Say you wanted this." Kyle's vision blurred. "No," he choked. The word exploded outward. The battlefield roared back to life. The brother screamed as his form began to unravel, flesh tearing away into streams of blood that whipped upward into the sky. The figure dissolved entirely, leaving nothing behind but a dark stain in the mud. Kale collapsed, gasping for breath. The roar returned, louder than ever. The ground trembled violently. The throne of skulls loomed closer now, impossibly massive, its steps slick with fresh blood that flowed like rivers down into the battlefield. Khorne rose. The blood god stood, towering above all things, his presence crushing, absolute. Every warrior froze mid-combat, weapons dripping, bodies trembling beneath his gaze. Kale felt it like gravity itself pressing down on his soul. Rage surged again, stronger than before, threatening to tear him apart from the inside. The blood god's attention was not gentle. It was not patient. It was hungry. Kale rose slowly, legs shaking. The unspoken command thundered through the realm. "Advance." Warriors surged toward the throne in a tidal wave of violence, trampling one another in their desperation to prove themselves. Kyle was carried forward by the mass, pulled inexorably closer. The pressure intensified with every step. Visions flashed before Kale's eyes, endless wars, uncountable battles, oceans of blood spilled in Khorne's name. He saw himself among them, armor repainted red, screaming challenges as he butchered foes without mercy. The vision thrilled and horrified him in equal measure. As he reached the base of the throne, the crush of bodies thinned. Only the strongest remained, warriors locked in brutal duels, killing and being killed in Khorne's shadow. Kyle climbed the first step. Pain lanced through him instantly, white, hot and overwhelming. His armor smoked where it touched the skulls, flesh blistering beneath ceramite. He climbed anyway. Each step demanded blood. Enemies rose to challenge him, daemons, champions, fallen heroes, each more deadly than the last. Kyle fought them with fading strength, every kill tearing another piece from his sanity. At the fifth step, he faltered. A massive figure blocked his path, its armor a patchwork of trophies taken from 1,000 wars. It wielded twin axes, each humming with warp energy. "You hesitate," it rumbled. "That is weakness." Kyle raised his fists. His chainsword was gone, his bolter lost. All he had left was himself. "Then kill me," Kyle said. The figure hesitated, just long enough. Kale lunged, driving his gauntleted fist into the creature's throat. Warp energy erupted violently as the blow landed, ripping the daemon apart in a storm of blood and fire. Kale fell to his knees. The throne loomed directly above him now. Khorne leaned forward. For the first time, Kale felt something beyond rage, judgment. The blood god's gaze stripped him bare, peeling away lies, excuses and fear. Kale felt every moment of weakness, every doubt, every act of mercy dragged into the open. Khorne's voice finally came, not as sound but as impact. "You deny what you are." Kyle clenched his fists, blood dripping from his fingers. "I deny you," he said. The pressure became unbearable. Kyle screamed as his body was lifted from the steps, suspended in midair. Every bone felt like it would shatter. Rage flooded him one last time, a tidal wave threatening to drown his soul completely. He saw the path laid before him. Eternal war, endless bloodshed, power beyond imagining. All he had to do was let go. Kyle screamed again, this time in defiance. The scream tore through the realm like a blade. Light erupted around him, cold, blinding, impossibly pure. The battlefield recoiled as if struck, warriors staggering, daemons shrieking in pain. The blood god roared in fury. Kale was torn free. The battlefield collapsed inward, warping and folding as Kale was ripped away from Khorne's grasp. The throne receded, the roar fading into distant thunder. Darkness swallowed him whole. And then, silence. Kyle drifted, broken and barely conscious through a void devoid of sound, color, or sensation. His body felt heavy, shattered, barely held together by will alone. Somewhere far away, something watched, not with hunger, but with curiosity. A whisper brushed his mind, soft and mocking. "You survived the blood god." It purred. "How delightful." Cold laughter echoed through the darkness. Kyle realized with dawning horror that he was not free. He had simply fallen deeper. Kyle awoke screaming. No sound came out. His mouth was open, lungs burning, but the void around him swallowed everything. He floated in absolute darkness, suspended in nothingness, his body numb and distant, as if it no longer truly belonged to him. There was no ground, no sky, only the feeling of being watched. The silence pressed in from all sides, heavier than any battlefield, heavier than Khorne's crushing rage. It felt intimate, curious, patient. A sensation crawled across Kale's thoughts like fingers tracing the inside of his skull. "You disappoint me," the whisper said softly. The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. It slid through his mind like silk soaked in poison. Kyle tried to move. His limbs responded sluggishly, as if reality itself resisted his will. "Where am I?" he demanded. Lotter answered him, gentle and amused. "Between truths," the voice replied. "Between lies, between what you were and what you will become." The darkness shifted. Color bled into existence slowly, like ink spreading through water. Shapes emerged, impossible geometry folding over itself, corridors twisting into spirals that bent inward, walls made of living flesh that breathed softly. Kale felt gravity return all at once. He crashed onto a smooth, warm surface, gasping as air rushed into his lungs. The ground beneath him pulsed faintly as if alive. He pushed himself up, heart hammering. He stood in a palace, or what passed for one. Vast arches rose overhead, formed from interwoven bone and translucent skin, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. Light came from nowhere and everywhere at once, bathing the space in shifting hues of violet, pink, and sickly gold. The air smelled sweet, too sweet. It clung to the back of Cal's throat, nauseating and addictive at the same time. Every breath made his head swim. He staggered forward, boots sinking slightly into the living floor. With every step, whispers brushed his thoughts, soft murmurs of desire, regret, longing, pleasure, pain. Slaanesh. Kyle's stomach twisted. Figures lined the hall on either side, frozen in poses of ecstasy and agony, intertwined so tightly they were indistinguishable. Some were human, others were alien, all were beautiful in a way that made his skin crawl, too perfect, too deliberate. As Kyle passed, their eyes opened. They smiled. "Come closer," they whispered. "We can make it stop." Kyle clenched his fists and kept walking. The whispers grew louder. They spoke with voices he recognized. A brother's laughter during rare moments of rest. A commander's praise. A lover's touch he had long forgotten. Promises of peace, of rest, of an end to suffering. With every word, his steps slowed. Pain surged through his body again, not the brutal agony of Khorne's realm, but something subtler. Exhaustion. Grief. Weariness so deep it felt eternal. Kyle fell to one knee. "I won't," he whispered. A figure emerged ahead, gliding rather than walking, tall and slender, its form shifting constantly, male and female overlapping in impossible harmony. Its face was flawless, eyes like liquid amethyst. "You already are," it said gently. It reached out, fingers brushing Kyle's cheek. The touch sent shockwaves through him. Every pain vanished, every wound healed. Warmth flooded his body, intoxicating and overwhelming. For a moment, Kale felt whole, complete, at peace. Tears burned at the corners of his eyes. The figure smiled wider. "You've suffered enough," it murmured. "Let us carry the burden." Visions flooded Kyle's mind. A life without war, without orders screamed over gunfire, without the constant weight of duty. He saw himself laying down his weapons, resting beneath a calm sky, feeling hands trace gentle patterns across his skin. The battlefield faded. The screams stopped. Kyle reached out before he realized what he was doing. His hand passed through the illusion. The piece shattered like glass. Kale gasped, reality slamming back into him. The figure recoiled, its smile twisting into something sharp and disappointed. "Oh," it said softly. "That was rude." The palace trembled. The frozen figures lining the hall screamed as their forms melted, flesh flowing like wax as they reached for Kale with pleading hands. "You deny joy," the voice echoed. "You deny release." The walls began to close in arches bending inward, the living flesh tightening like a trap. Kyle ran. The corridor twisted and reformed ahead of him, leading him deeper into the palace. Rooms opened and closed at random, each offering glimpses of indulgence and horror intertwined, banquets of living flesh, dancers whose movements tore their own bodies apart, artists sculpting screams into song. The whispers grew frantic. "Stay, feel, forget." Kale burst into a vast chamber at the palace's heart. A mirror stood at its center, tall, ornate, framed in gold and bone, its surface perfectly smooth and reflective. Kyle slowed. Against every instinct, he approached. The mirror showed him as he was, bloodied armor, cracked helm, eyes hollow with exhaustion. Then the reflection smiled. The image shifted. Kale saw himself clad in elegant armor, pristine and flawless, his scars gone, his expression calm and confident. Power radiated from him, not brutal like Khorne's, but seductive and effortless. You could be this, the reflection said. Behind it, the palace bowed. You deserve this. Carl raised a shaking hand toward the glass. The reflection reached back. At the moment their fingers touched, pain erupted. Not physical, existential. Carl screamed as memories were ripped from him. Every moment of restraint, every refusal, every act of loyalty torn away and offered back as temptation. The mirror cracked. From within it, something pushed outward. A claw pierced the surface, followed by another. The reflection stepped through, becoming real, its smile widening impossibly. Then let me show you hell, it whispered. The chamber collapsed. Kyle fell screaming into darkness once more, the laughter of Slaanesh echoing after him like a promise that would never be fulfilled. And somewhere beyond the palace, beyond the void, something older and colder waited, watching, calculating. Kyle did not land, he drifted. The darkness returned, but it was different now, layered, structured, deliberate. It felt less like emptiness and more like a vast machine, every unseen part turning with patient intent. The laughter faded, replaced by a quiet hum that vibrated through his bones. Light appeared below him. Not the violent red of Khorne's realm, not the seductive glow of Slaanesh's palace. This light was pale, cold, unforgiving. Cal descended slowly, as if gravity itself wanted him to understand where he was going. A world emerged beneath him. Cities stretched to the horizon, vast beyond comprehension, their spires rising like needles stabbed into a sickly gray sky. Endless processions moved through the streets, billions of souls marching in perfect lines, heads bowed, faces empty. There were no screams. That terrified Kale more than anything he had seen so far. He touched ground softly, boots clicking against stone that was smooth, worn down by uncountable footsteps. The air was thin and sterile, carrying the faint scent of incense and decay. He stood in a plaza the size of continents. At its center rose a throne, not of skulls, not of flesh, but of knowledge. Books, data, slates, cogitator banks, and screaming faces fused into a single impossible structure. Blue, white energy crackled across it in precise, mathematical patterns. Kale knew where he was, Tzeentch's domain, the changer of ways. The sky shifted constantly, symbols and equations forming and dissolving in the clouds. Towers rearranged themselves as he watched, streets twisting into spirals that led nowhere and everywhere at once. Figures moved around him, robed and masked, their steps synchronized despite never touching. Some whispered to themselves, others laughed quietly. A few wept as they clutched parchments filled with prophecies that burned their hands. Kale took a step forward. The plaza responded. Thousands of heads turned toward him at once. Their eyes glowed blue. Welcome, 1,000 voices said in perfect unison. Carl's thoughts began to slip. Memories rearranged themselves, events blurring together. He struggled to remember how long he had been here, or even who he had been before the warp swallowed him. A figure approached from the crowd, tall and hunched, its body wrapped in layered robes covered in shifting runes. Where its face should have been was a swirling void filled with stars. You have walked the paths of rage, it said calmly. You have tasted desire. Now you will understand truth. Carl shook his head violently. I don't want your truth. The figure tilted its head. You already live within it. The world shattered. The plaza folded inward, collapsing into countless overlapping scenes. Cal was pulled through them all at once, visions crashing into him faster than he could process. He saw every war he had ever fought, not as moments, but as patterns. Every death forming part of a greater design. Every act of heroism feeding an outcome he had never chosen. He saw the Immaterium not as a bulwark against chaos, but as a machine of suffering, grinding souls into fuel to delay an inevitable end. He saw the Emperor on the golden throne, not as a god, but as a corpse screaming silently, holding back damnation through endless agony. Kale screamed as knowledge burned through him. This is hell, the voice of Tzeentch said gently. Not pain, not pleasure, understanding. The visions intensified. Kyle saw himself again and again, in 1,000 possible futures. A hero, a traitor, a daemon prince, a forgotten corpse drifting in space, each path branching endlessly, none of them free. You were never meant to escape. The voice continued. Your resistance was accounted for. Kyle fell to his knees, clutching his head. No, he whispered. There has to be a way. The figure knelt before him. There is, it said softly. Acceptance. The sky darkened. The city froze. Every moving figure stopped mid-step, eyes locked on Kale. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it felt like reality itself was vibrating apart. Then everything burned. Green fire erupted across the city, devouring towers and streets alike. The ordered patterns collapsed into writhing chaos. Screams finally filled the air as structures melted into impossible shapes. From the flames, something vast emerged, rotten, ancient, patient, Nurgle. The ground beneath Kale softened, turning to foul mud that sucked at his boots. The air thickened, heavy with rot and despair. The cold light faded, replaced by a dim, sickly glow. A garden spread outward in all directions, trees of swollen flesh, flowers dripping with pus, ponds of stagnant filth bubbling softly. Creatures moved lazily through the mire, smiling with genuine affection as disease consumed them. Kale gagged, staggering forward. A massive shape loomed ahead, bloated and immense, its laughter deep and warm, almost kind. "Poor little thing," Nurgle rumbled. "You're so tired." Carl felt it then, not decay, relief. The pain in his body dulled. His exhaustion eased. The crushing weight of endless struggle lifted slightly. "You don't have to fight anymore," Nurgle said gently. "Just rest. Let go." Kale sank to his knees in the filth. For the first time since his descent, he wanted to stop. The garden pulsed warmly around him. Creatures approached, laying comforting hands on his shoulders, their touch strangely soothing despite their grotesque forms. "This is hell," Nurgle continued. "Endurance without hope. Survival without meaning." Kyle's vision blurred. Then something snapped. A memory surfaced, not of war, not of glory, but of a simple moment. Standing watch beside a brother in silence, the weight of a bolter. The knowledge that, no matter how terrible things became, he would stand. Kale pushed himself up. "No," he said hoarsely. The garden recoiled. Nurgle's smile faltered for the first time. Kale stood shaking, covered in filth, broken beyond reason, but still standing. The realms began to overlap. The battlefield of Khorne bled into the garden. The palace of Slaanesh flickered in and out of existence. The impossible city of Tzeentch folded overhead. All four pressed in on him at once. And Kale understood. Hell was not one place. It was eternity without escape, an existence where every path led back into suffering, shaped by gods who fed on every choice, every emotion, every refusal. The warp was not punishment, it was consumption. Kale screamed, not in rage, not in despair, but in defiance. The scream echoed across all realms. For a single, impossible moment, the gods hesitated, then reality tore apart. Kale was hurled upward, ripped from the warp in a storm of light and pain, his soul burning as it was forced back into the material universe. He awoke on cold metal. Warning klaxons blared. Medica servitors hovered over him, their lenses glowing red. Carl gasped, dragging air into his lungs, his body racked with pain but alive. Around him the ship groaned, battered but intact. A voice crackled over the vox. "He's awake." Carl stared up at the ceiling, heart pounding. He had escaped hell, but he knew the truth now. Hell was not behind him. It waited, in every war, in every order given, in every soul consumed to keep the Imperium alive, and one day it would come for him again.